Rightio, let's get in the third and final installment of the most common Subaru mods, and these tend to be the most beneficial. Rightio, on this one, we're going to touch on some of the most, well, in my eyes, the most beneficial common mods people do to their Subarus when they first get them. And straight off the bat, one thing I tend to do is check the brake pads and rotors, because most people think you need to upgrade to Brembos to have really good stopping power, but you'd actually be surprised how well a good set of pads and rotors will help your braking. In saying that, if you do have like an early model WRX with the 2-pot sliders, upgrading the 4-pots will help, but if you already have the 4-pot brakes, a bit more expensive brand of pads and rotors will help, but obviously don't go crazy and put 2-piece rotors on your daily driver, because one, they can get a bit noisy, and secondly, they're not cheap. And the other thing you need to remember too is what you're going to be doing with the car, because most racing pads and rotors tend to have a ideal temperature range where they function the best, which you nearly never will see on the street. So keep in mind that just because I say improve brake pads, I don't mean going out and getting full-blown race pads for your daily driver, because waste of money and can get dangerous. But whilst we're talking about brakes, one of my other favorite things to do was the braided brake lines, because from factory they're just a really, I won't say cheap, but they're just rubber lines that when you push down on the brakes, obviously there's going to be force in the line that will cause it to want to spread, and you lose a bit of feel and pressure going to the pads and rotors, well, going to the caliper, sorry. But a good set of braided brake lines will eliminate, well, almost eliminate all that loss, because steel braided lines, so there's not as much flex in them. And the other thing is they tend to handle heat a lot better than a basic rubber line. Only thing I can say with that is, especially with the GDs, make sure when you install them, you run them correctly, because their mounting isn't like a GC8 or the factory ones where it is a fixed mount. They actually slide, the hose slides through the mount, and you can ask Nathan what happens when that slides too far one way, because it kind of happened to him and it ate through the brake line because the line was rubbing on his rim. And yeah, that wasn't a nice night in the middle of a storm having to change a brake line for the boss. But yeah, brake lines are amazing to get braided ones. And the other thing I tend to do whilst I'm there is change the clutch line. It's not as needed, but again, it's more for the feel, like the pedal feel. It just makes it a bit firmer and not as spongy. But with WRXs, you don't tend to have a spongy clutch, because most people have a heavy duty clutch or a half decent clutch in it. Not like the Liberties, where they tend to be a bit softer because they're more of a luxury car. I've noticed that with my car, everything seems slightly softer than it should. Apart from the fact I've got a reasonably heavy duty clutch in my car. So that's just one thing to keep an eye out for. And finally, if your car's lowered either with springs or coilovers, one thing people tend to forget but really should put in their car is either the anti-lift kit, which with the GDs is pretty extensive because it includes the lower control arm bushes and lots of washers to space down the big annoying U-brace on that model. And yeah, it can be a little tedious to install. Whereas on the GC8s, it's pretty much just the rear lower control arm bush, which changes the caster and everything on the arms to make it so when you lower the car, it keeps everything nice and flat and doesn't throw things out of whack. And whilst you're doing that, the other one, it's not too expensive, but it definitely helps, is the bump steer correction kit for the steering rack. Power steering rack? Yeah, power steering rack. Because again, when you lower the car, you change the geometry of everything, and the bump steer correction kit stops the fact that everything's out of whack and not flat. So when you hit bumps, it's more prone to bump steer, which means you hit the bump and your steering wheel wants to go one way or the other. And the bump steer correction kit, again, levels everything out, so it's a much smoother drive than without it. Another thing I can briefly touch on, because people tend to go to modifying these very quickly as well, but sometimes do it in the wrong way, which is sway bars. A big sway bar is great if you understand why you want it. Because I've had many racers come in chasing stock sway bars, because when they have the big sway bars plus their coilovers, everything gets a bit too stiff and it just doesn't ride right. Whereas if you have stock suspension or stock struts, so normal struts with lowering springs, having bigger sway bars tend to help you more than adding them to coilovers, because the coilovers already stiffen up the car enough, so you don't really need it, and it becomes a bit of a overkill, which again Nathan has experience with his old STI, because he had the fancy coilovers, he had the big sway bars, he had everything, and he hated driving it because it was just so stiff and you can't really use it. Whereas with me, with my STI, I had the big coilovers but stock sway bars, and it felt absolutely amazing. But yeah, guys, this was just another quick one and the end of the trilogy. So make sure you join us on Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. for our 3P Garage Live over on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, where we talk Subarus and pretty much whatever comes to mind. It can get a little bit interesting over there. And if you've liked this kind of content, please like, comment, share, and subscribe, so I keep doing it for you. So yeah, thanks. See you later. But yeah, so I guess let me know down in the comments which ones of these mods you've done to your personal car, and if there's anything else you can think of that people may be interested in doing when they first get their cars. Thanks, guys.